Guten Abend, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren. Wie schön, dass Sie so zahlreich gekommen sind. Welcome everybody to the Munich Documentation Center. I'm very glad that so many of you came, so many young people, and that there are already interesting discussions going on. I'm absolutely delighted that we celebrate this 4th of July with the talk of Roger Cohen, highly acclaimed New York Times op-ed columnist since 2009, who has served as foreign editor and foreign correspondent for the New York Times, among other places in Berlin. As a correspondent, he has covered the war in Yugoslavia, wars in the Middle East and North Africa. He's the author of a number of books, topics ranging from his own South African, British, Eastern European family history to the history of American POWs in Nazi Germany. His work was awarded with an impressive list of prizes, and he was guest professor in Princeton and Bloomington. I'm very happy and deeply honored that he has accepted our invitation to Munich today. And I'm very grateful to the Bavarian American Academy and to the Amerikahaus, who are our cooperation partners for this evening, to Heike Paul, to Margarete Schweiger-Wilhelm, and to members in my own team here at the NS Documentation Center, Ilo Holzmeier and others who have been instrumental in putting this evening together and also in putting this lecture series together. July 4th, 1776 was most likely the day when the members of the Continental Congress declared the 13 American colonies to be independent and no longer subject to the monarch of Britain. This is when the contact with Europe started to be foreign policy and transatlantic relations literally took off. Much has happened since. Around 3 years ago, in October 2016, and shortly before the last US election, the New Yorker published its regular column, The Borowitz Report, by Andy Borowitz. Well, I know you're laughing. The column was entitled, Queen Offers to Restore British Rule over the United States. The report claimed that in an unexpected televised address, Queen Elizabeth II had offered to take the former colonies back under British rule. The Queen was quoted saying, and I quote, "This 240-year experiment in self-rule began with the best of intentions, but I think we can all agree that it didn't end well. Americans," the Queen urged further, "should therefore put in her name on election day, after which transition to British rule could begin with a minimum of bother." In the wake of the Brexit decision, the Queen reassured Americans that this would have no effect on the new transatlantic relations. On the contrary, she was planning on an old-school monarchy. The Borowitz report ended with the following quote, "Using the closing moments of her speech to tout her credentials, the Queen made it clear that she has never used email and only had sex with one person very occasionally." I remember reading this column on my phone, walking on the way to campus, most likely being late, in Bloomington, Indiana, and only half concentrated. I was reading some news thing, and for 1.5 seconds, I thought the message was actual news. And for another second, I said to myself, oh, why? Why not? That's a good idea. This would have definitely redefined transatlantic relations. But of course, as we all know, far from it, my foolish and hurried naivete of a second and a half reflects the state of mind and state of desperation I and half the country were in before Election Day on November 9, 2006, let alone after that night. A couple of months later, I had the pleasure of first encountering Roger Cohen, who then was the inaugural chair of the Poynter Center at Indiana University's acclaimed media school. We met for lunch with a number of female colleagues. I wonder if there was a meeting with male-only faculty as well. I don't know. And we had very interesting conversations, though I thought, on the subject of Trump. I talked about the alienation I and my family had experienced with the country since the election. And despite being very well off as academic migrants from Europe, unlike colleagues or students affected by the Muslim ban right at that time. This conversation on the growing fears of an international population in the US eventually entered Roger's column, raising the question of what happened to the country which had been admired by the whole world for its liberal democracy and that was praised in German newspapers until the election for its innovative, liberal, and open society. And rightly so. Yet many problems which for Europeans surfaced only in November 2016 were not new. Yet the elections changed the image of the US dramatically. Here, right at the spot of the former Brown House, the center of the Nazi Party, this is especially painful. Only a few meters from here, American re-education started right after the war, when the Amerikahaus was opened in the former Führerbau, and little Bavarian boys and girls were taught what democracy actually means. Though this seems to be the perfect day and the perfect setting for a talk on the transatlantic relationship, the bond that went freelance. Roger, thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to your talk.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Miriam, for those very generous words. Miriam and I, as she suggested, have a friendship that began in the American Midwest. And from the first moment of that lunch we had together, I appreciated her fine sense of humor, her subtle mind, and there, right in the middle of America, lo and behold, a European sensibility. So it's been a great pleasure to continue the friendship, first in Berlin and then here. Thank you to Amerikahaus and to the Bavarian American Academy for inviting me, and thank you for showing up in such impressive numbers. It's a great pleasure to be back in Germany. I was chief correspondent in Berlin zwischen 98 und 2001. And there my German these days rather ends. And an honor to be here at the Munich Documentation Center for the History of National Socialism. Without memory, we are lost. Yet memory is a shifting thing, and it may take time, as with this important institution, for a nation or a city to be clear-eyed about its past. We live in an ahistorical moment. Therein lies its danger. The President of the United States shows contempt for the international institutions that evolved in the aftermath of World War II to ensure that Nazi barbarism would not revisit the earth. For this White House, NATO and the European Union are not foundations of peace, but foul fonts of multilateralism, their least favorite word. Thousands of children are separated from their parents at the Mexican border and caged in, let's use the strict historical term, concentration camps. This headline appears on the eve of my country's Independence Day. Tanks arrive in D.C. for Trump's 4th of July celebration. Tanks arrive in D.C. for Trump's 4th of July celebration. Perhaps this image provokes in you a little shudder. Washington, of course, is not Nuremberg. Still, truth is being trampled upon in the highest office of the land. Freedom's price is eternal vigilance. I speak now, as Miriam noted, on July 4th, blue, red, and white, the day that America's founders broke free from British colonial rule and declared, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Think of those words, ladies and gentlemen, in 1776. They identified for the first time the quest for personal happiness as a motive for political rebellion. They have proved inspirational to countless, millions upon millions of freedom-seeking people across the world. If America is not a certain idea of liberty, it is nothing. I've chosen not to eat hamburgers and hot dogs today with my loved ones and instead be with you. Strange choice, you may think. I've done so because I believe that nowhere do the American idea and American values occupy as critical a place in the national consciousness as in the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, reborn from Stunde Null on foundations that owed much to American sacrifice in battle and American magnanimity in victory. Now, however, this bond is fraying. Trump's is a valueless foreign policy. His America stands for money, not morals. Pay up, pay up. That's the cry that goes out to Europe. For Germany, more perhaps than any other European ally, just because the foundation of the Bundesrepublik was so wrapped up with America and its values. This departure is troubling. Certainties in general are eroding. The Declaration of Independence itself has come under the critical lens of identity politics. If men were created equal, what of women? If the founders were declaring liberation from British colonization, were they not also endorsing enslavement for another people, the blacks, who were self-evidently created much less equal? History is a battlefield, ladies and gentlemen. I think we must be very careful in judging the acts of another era by the values of our own. If the identity politics of the Democratic Party end up invalidating the inspirational core of America, ex pluribus unum, then Trump may well end up as a two-term president. You do not get to the White House as a yes, but patriot. I became an American citizen 15 years ago. To the end of my days, the people in that Brooklyn courtroom, of every color, age, origin, and creed, yet bound by shared belief in the rights and responsibilities conferred on them by the American Constitution, will be an inspiration to me. Ex pluribus unum. Out of many, one, must be the daily business of a well-lived American life. Yet Americans increasingly entrench themselves in ideological canyons that divide rather than unite. They forsake citizenship for partisanship. Debate and the airing of differences are good things, a fact often forgotten in this age of hysteria, pumped up minute by minute by social media. The most dangerous approach to the past is the attempt to conceal it. The most dangerous attitude toward truth is contempt for its importance. The most dangerous use of language is one that strips it of meaning. The Transatlantic Alliance is many things, but hinges on a few words, on language, from Article 5 of the NATO Treaty of 1949, 70 years ago this year. The parties agree that an attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. Now, if President Trump were standing where I am today, on this stage, behind this podium, he might well say that it's phenomenal, or amazing, or fantastic, or beautiful, or great to be with you. It really, really, really is. Just as it was phenomenal or amazing to hang with North Korea's brutal dictator Kim Jong-un at the DMZ the other day, and phenomenal and amazing, ladies and gentlemen, that Article 5 exists. But I ask you today, how much credence would you give these words? What weight would they have? Would they be any more than Schnee von gestern, snow from yesterday? Meaning is one victim of the froth that bubbles up with the current blurring of reality and reality TV. Perhaps it's their most important victim. It's through meaning that people establish their bearings in the world. When bearings are lost, anything can happen, even the unimaginable. It is of the nature of life that the unimaginable is not impossible. This very institution where we are right now reminds us of that by documenting how a civilized people could sign up for industrialized mass murder. We all watched in April as flames engulfed Notre Dame. Civilization is fragile. Democracy is fragile. I've seen that in the wars I've covered, from the Balkans to the Middle East. Fragile like that toppled spire. It's impossible today to ignore the spread of the hateful. For the worst, most xenophobic people around the world, Donald Trump has declared open season. Moments of historical flux involving the passing of power from one nation to another are always dangerous. Moments of economic upheaval, such as today's technology revolution, are always disorienting. Today, China rises. More than 2.3 billion people are monthly active users of Facebook. Europe fractures. A post-Merkel Germany appears around the corner. What is the relevance of the Transatlantic Alliance to this unstable environment? Has the alliance already frayed beyond recognition? How combustible is the world of Trump's casual contempt for truth? I will try to offer some answers to these questions. But before I do, allow me to explain what formed me, what formed my thinking. Well, I am, despite appearances, an optimist. South Africa, where my parents were born and I spent my infancy and some of the most formative moments of my childhood, leaves you with that. The inevitable cataclysm that I heard about throughout my youth, my teens, did not happen. The blacks did not rise out of those shanties at the horizon to avenge the crimes of apartheid and chase my family and 4 million other whites out of South Africa. Why did it not happen? Well, because of leadership, statesmanship, that forgotten word, Mandela's chiefly, and de Klerk's. It did not happen because the promise of the future was placed above the wounds of the past, coexistent, imperfect, agonizing, unsatisfactory, prevailed over vengeance. Compromise is a one word that may save 1 million lives. I learned that in my bones. Because apartheid was intolerable to my father, I grew up mainly in Britain, a Britain for which the continent, as it was then called, was vaguely threatening, a place of garlic, rabies, Napoleonic law, and unhygienic habits, as well as the Germans, who were always available as the butt of bad jokes. One of the great satisfactions of my life was watching this prejudice fall away. Britain take its place in Europe. Gastronomy and England find an unlikely accommodation. And tolerance spread. Until, in 2016, Britain, in an extraordinary act of self-harm, especially for a normally prudent and stable country, hurled itself over the cliff called Brexit. Bigotry reasserted itself, and Boris Johnson bobbed up to reveal the inexhaustible English fascination with the jolly good pranks of the spoiled public schoolboy, and to heck with the dire consequences. This Britain of my upbringing inclined me to love of the European community's conciliatory impact. This was reinforced by subsequent experience on that then faraway continent. Paris is where I started in journalism 42 years ago, freelancing for a publication called Paris Metro. It's where I was freed by another language to reinvent myself and discovered that despite appearances, I was born an outsider. The city saved me somehow, allowed me to be. It's where I understood the Franco-German decision to put behind them repetitive wars and put in their place an iron and steel community that would be the seed of the European Union. It's where I grasped that Europe was a way out of painful national history, a means to reinvention, and that the undergirding for this remarkable experiment in integration came from a newly formed European power, the United States of America. A posting in Italy taught me how important the anchor of Europe was in preventing that beautiful country, late formed like Germany, from being lost to communism or sliding toward Africa in a deluge of misrule. We must scale the Alps, was the cry of Ugo Lamalfa. Europe for Italy was a magnet, as it would subsequently be for the countries of Central Europe after their liberation from the Soviet Imperium. We want to be normal, Adam Michnik, the great Polish dissident, would tell me, and only the European Union and NATO could secure normality. For Poland, of course, normality included the assurance of being an independent nation rather than being wiped from the map. Covering the Balkan Wars in the first half of the 1990s, the 100,000 dead, the 2.2 million displaced, Sarajevo's torment, I understood the terrible potency of suppressed history, the moral abdication of the bystander, and the imperative of decency, that word dear to Camus. I saw how to end a war, the illusion that the hour of Europe had come, had to give way to the reality of American power, tough diplomacy backed by the credible threat of force. Europe had been divided for decades. It was still brittle. The miracle of the ocean-spanning institutions that transformed, stabilized, and protected Europe, creating a continent whole and free, was never more apparent to me than in the midst of a European war. Then, a little over 20 years ago, I came to Germany. I came reluctantly. Perhaps for a Jewish family, it's always a complicated decision to choose to live in Germany. I came to Berlin, a Berlin in transformation, a construction site really, a city becoming a capital again, confronting its history as Munich has. I'm glad I came. My German years were a lesson. I remember telling a woman, these were pre-#MeToo days, what beautiful blue eyes she had, and her telling me she hated her eyes, and my asking why, and she telling me they were the eyes of her father, who had been a camp commander. That silenced me. As a Jew, I had not thought much about German pain, the pain of the descendants of the perpetrators, nor about the pain of division, nor about the long journey of the Bundesrepublik toward a full acknowledgement of the crimes of the Third Reich and a full accounting, nor about how Europe, for many post-war Germans, had been a road out of the rubble and out of the shame, nor about America's particular role in that journey, nor about how American values and the rule of law had offered a compass to a shattered nation, nor about the redemptive power for Germany of that blue and gold European flag. Learning about Germany, I also learned about being a Jew. I inverted the mirror. I understood the possibility of conciliation. Contact is a great dispeller of myth. If I did not end up doing what my uncle and father had done, coming from faraway South Africa to join the war effort for the preservation of freedom, it was because Europe and Germany had been remade, not by some magic wand, but by patient, consistent construction of a new order in which America and Europe were bound not only by a military alliance, but by a shared commitment to freedom, democracy, human rights, a free press, open societies, the rule of law, and individual dignity. How then, ladies and gentlemen, could the current unraveling not alarm me? After all, it represents a negation of all I believe. Each of us has a journey. I am a Jew of South African descent, raised in Britain, shaped by Europe, an American citizen now. These are the threads of my story, and where they have left me is what I've tried to convey to you tonight. I am a bridge, not a wall person. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day. Or as they say in Alabama, even a blind pig finds an acorn now and then. The Atlantic Alliance is like that these days. It stumbles along, not without occasional use, but stripped of its core. Kim Jong-un, I hear, likes President Trump because he has no values and therefore makes no judgment on the North Korean reign of terror, starvation, murder. Vladimir Putin declares the liberal idea has become obsolete. This is no longer a preposterous statement. When it comes to the West as a moral rather than a mere geographical expression, the Trump administration has gone AWOL. The West, I would suggest, stands for nothing. Or perhaps it stands for the threat of tariffs. Into that vacuum step two authoritarian societies, China and Russia. China has 5G, Russia is vast, they don't have to worry about democratic consent. Above all, they are filled with a self-belief that I feel has deserted the West as a political entity since Donald Trump took office. I lived enough of the American century, to feel it in my bones. That movie, however, has ended. History is not an argument leading to a logical conclusion, any more than human nature is composed of black and white. In the mist, the specters of nationalism, nativism, and xenophobia have stirred, now visible to everyone, not least in Budapest and Warsaw. Remember, as this place reminds us, the quest for homogeneous societies led the 20th century to its most unspeakable horrors. This is the abyss into which my president tends to beckon us. It's okay to be a racist. It's okay to stiff people. It's okay to lie. These are the semiotics of Trump. I wish I didn't have to say this. I'm a naturalized American with an outsized belief in my country's capacity for good, the blemished beneficence of American power, and a patriotic desire to respect the occupant of the Oval Office, even when I disagree with him. And up to now, it always has been a him. Maybe not after next year, we will see. Today, however, patriotism, as I understand it, requires something else. It demands the defense of the Constitution, the rule of law, truth, freedom, human rights, and the planet itself against the ravages issuing from the Trump White House. My president calls the press enemies of the people, a phrase of pure totalitarian pedigree. We are not enemies, we are observers. Trump reminds me of the indignant President Diem during the Vietnam War, demanding of the AFP bureau chief, François Sully, who had filed a series of critical reports. "Why do you always see the hole in the donut?" Diem asked Sully. "Because, Monsieur le Président," Sully replied, "there is a hole in the donut." Speaking of donuts, Boris Johnson may well become British Prime Minister. Speaking of donuts, Boris Johnson may well become British Prime Minister later this month. The United States and Britain would then be led by men with striking similarities, and not just on the hair front. Two charlatans and narcissists with flimsy or non-existent notions of the truth, utterly unprincipled, given to racist and anti-immigrant slurs, skilled practitioners of the art of the politics of spectacle, manipulators of fear, nationalist traffickers in an imaginary past of radiant greatness, with giant holes in their center where conscience and integrity went missing. So much for the leadership of the free world. Trump and Johnson, who express admiration for each other, would like to go freelance. There's talk of a post-Brexit free trade agreement, as if such things can be conjured up overnight. Trump and Matteo Salvini would also like to go freelance, much like Trump and Viktor Orban, arguing in effect for a kind of Putinization of the West. That is to say, the transformation of a liberal system into an illiberal one, where a simulacrum of democracy exists, but the press and an independent judiciary, those tiresome pests, have been brought under control, business opportunity handed to family and friends, and the fix is in when the quaint ritual of elections comes around. Orban has already completed this sinister makeover to feeble protest from the European Union. The Visegrad countries are charting their own course. The transatlantic relationship has given way to transatlantic relationships, and wide swathes of Europe, including this country, legitimately ask themselves if Trump's America is friend or foe. How did this happen, ladies and gentlemen? Trump and Johnson are symptoms, not cause. Every American is responsible for Trump. He holds up a mirror to a society in the dizzying grip of social media influencers, image merchants, money, fear, and frustration. He was chosen without illusion to keep out the Clintons and blow things up. Why? I think we must look to what I call the 5 I's: inequality, impunity, invisibility, immigration, and the internet. Inequality that has risen as workers in the bottom 60% of American society have seen no real wage increase since 1980, while the richest 1% now own more wealth than the bottom 90%. Impunity that allowed the designers of the financial weapons of mass destruction that destroyed the livelihoods and equity of many millions of people in 2008 to walk away, just walk away, their elite status intact. Invisibility that gave many citizens from Germany to the United States, from France to Italy, living far from the wired metropolises at the nexus of globalization, the impression that they counted for nothing as their hospitals died, their train connections disappeared, their schools closed, their jobs went elsewhere, their skills were devalued, and their communities were hollowed out. Immigration that in both Europe and the United States brought millions of undocumented migrants to the borders without our societies showing any capacity to agree on a policy that was clear, firm, and humane. The internet that through social media destroyed traditional mediators of society, like established political parties, the SPD, for example, and empowered the politics of the mob. As Steve Bannon once told me, what counts today is not persuasion, but mobilization. Persuasion, he believes, is overrated. Here was the grist for Trump's populism, and that of all his forerunners or imitators across the West. Here were the sources of anger and fear that could be exploited. Here's the American carnage he could shamefully exploit. Here's how he could declare, "I am your voice." Here's why, in the name of America First nationalism, another slogan of foul pedigree, he went about trashing the multilateral post-war order America helped forge, and the institutions like NATO and the European Union that were the pillars of it. Here's why he speaks not only of a second term, but of staying in power beyond that for a possible third term if the masses demand it, as he tweeted the other day. After all, Xi Jinping has made himself emperor for life. Trump's inner despot, like Dr. Strangelove's arm, keeps popping up. The possibility, ladies and gentlemen, that Trump will be re-elected is real because the combination of a strong economy and his insidious rabble-rousing is potent. Even for a country with strong democratic institutions like the United States, I believe this would be dangerous. It would also be dangerous for the world. Western democracies need to take stock of the failings I have described. They must find a better balance between individualism and responsibilities. Avenues to success must exist for every citizen, not just the privileged. The United States is a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws. A nation of immigrants and a nation of laws. A reasonable immigration policy would respect both those foundations. But compromise is a forgotten word in American politics. It's not enough, I regret to say, for Democrats to say that a wall is immoral, or welcome every migrant, or deplore the abominable camps that have multiplied. They must articulate a policy, or again, risk handing the election to Trump. My breakfast companion this morning, a retired German businessman, told me of riding the tram the other day, and when a large black African man got off, hearing this from the person opposite him on the tram: "Our Adolf would have dealt with that." Look no further to understand the AfD. Trump has empowered these people. He's made racism okay. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that Pax Americana died with and through Trump. He fast-forwarded a process that had begun, certainly with Obama, whose approach to American power was essentially managed decline. China and India did not begin rising in 2016. The Pacific Century did not begin then either. The need for America to prepare for a post-primacy world predated Trump. At almost 75 years from the end of World War II, it's true that the liberal order was suffering from a debilitating complacency that I've tried to describe. But Donald Trump took a sledgehammer to the heart of the West and the Transatlantic Alliance. Its commitment to individual freedom and agency safeguarded through the rule of law, and thereby eviscerated the raison d'etre of the alliance. This, to quote Talleyrand, was worse than a crime. It was a mistake. A freelance world, no longer built around rules or institutions, is a much more dangerous world. That, ladies and gentlemen, is where we are headed, or perhaps where we already are. Now, in conclusion, a famous Jewish telegram read, "Start worrying, details to follow." Perhaps I have worried you too much. I told you I'm an optimist. Putin is wrong. The liberal order is not obsolete, nor the alliance that defends it. Those words that we Americans celebrate today, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, still resonate. May the mall in Washington be deserted today as Trump's tanks roll by. Look at the pro-democracy demonstrators in Hong Kong, who know that acceptance of the Chinese justice system would doom their society. Look at Greece, which votes this weekend and has come through a 25% cut in its economic output, with its democracy intact, thanks in the end to the anchor of the European Union and NATO. Look at the European Parliament elections, where turnout was much higher this year. Yes, Salvini and Farage and Le Pen did well, but Liberal Democrats still form a majority. Perhaps in optimistic moments, I think 2019 will be remembered as the year the European election ceased to be a sideshow, the year Europeans awoke to the need to preserve the greatest miracle of the second half of the 20th century, and the only miracle so unclassifiable we are reduced to calling it an entity. That union of 500 million people, that peace magnet, that aspiration of the bloodied, that bastion of law, that European Union on which Britain has disgracefully turned its back. The debacle of Brexit has done a service by illustrating how painful self-destructive folly can be. Europe as an idea feels more alive to me today, more relevant and more urgent. It's the new home of multilateralism, a rules-based international order of human rights and freedom. To France and to Germany falls the task of asserting this. Deep Euro-American bonds do endure, despite Trump's best efforts. We must fight to preserve them, just as we should fight to the last to keep Britain in Europe. Perhaps you know the story of the old man on his deathbed, approached by his children. Dad, they say, we didn't want to raise this before, but feel we must now. Do you wish to be buried or cremated? A long pause ensues. Oh, I don't know, he says. Surprise me. Democracies will still surprise us. I began with memory. Not so very long ago, where we find ourselves today, Hitler and his brown shirts congregated. Nobody imagined then that the beer-soaked hatred they spewed would end with the desperate scratch marks of dying Jewish children on the walls of Auschwitz-Birkenau. It is imperative to remember, most of all when we are invited to forget and lose our bearings and cease distinguishing between truth and falsehood. We are in danger of forgetting. As the Polish poet Wisława Szymborska wrote of the aftermath of war, those who knew what was going on here must make way for those who know little and less than little, and finally, as little as nothing. As little as nothing. That is Donald Trump. But I also hear in my mind the words of another Polish poet, Czesław Miłosz, on the nature of totalitarian tyranny and the power of liberty and the creative human spirit. You who wronged a simple man, bursting into laughter at the crime, and kept a pack of fools around you to mix good and evil, to blur the line. Though everyone bowed down before you, saying virtue and wisdom lit your way, striking gold medals in your honor, glad to have survived another day. Do not feel safe. The poet remembers. You kill one, but another is born. The words are written down, the deed, the date. And you'd have done better with a winter dawn, a rope and a branch bowed beneath your weight. Let us not despair, but rather rededicate ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, to ensuring that, in Lincoln's words at Gettysburg, government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that, and I guess you all agree, is very worthy of a July 4th celebration. And I really want to thank you for that. I've just been thinking among the crowd here is an American director. I've introduced you just briefly, Jonathan Jakubowicz, who's actually from Venezuela originally. And I met him last fall here in Munich. because in Bloomington we became good friends with Jesse Eisenberg, the actor. And Jesse came to Munich, and also Jonathan and his wife, in order to make a film. And we came to the film set. And the set was outside of Munich in the woods, and Jesse was up in an old German linden tree, one of the oldest, and around him were children. And it was a scene of Marcel Marceau, the mime, saving French Jewish children by making sort of no sound, speechlessly telling them what was going on beyond in the woods and how they would be safe. The film will be out, I think, in a couple of months. But it was an incredible moment, sort of like these young Americans coming here to Germany and doing this film. And we've met again this week. Jesse Eisenberg was here again, and we were in a crowd of people. And they asked me, well, do you miss America, or are you happy to be back? And I said, yeah, there's many things we miss about America. And then he said, are you sure? And I've never heard that from Americans before, because Americans used to be very proud of their country, even the intellectuals or the critical ones. And I think there is a lot that one can miss not being in America. And one of the things that I'm sometimes asking myself is what kind of new alliances we might need to form. You said you're an optimist. And now we have, before the European election, we have Steve Bannon touring Europe, making new alliances, very strong alliances. We had recently here a demonstration in Munich by a fair number of cultural institutions which call themselves the Many, die Vielen. And it was a large gathering of people who wanted to come together and sort of protest against the recent politics and to protest for Europe. And there were groups among them who would have never dreamed of being pro-Europe 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. You said you're an optimist. What kind of new alliances do we need, and do we urgently need, and how do we get there?
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you all very much. The first thing that needs to be done, in my view, for the well-being of the world is to defeat President Trump next year in the election. Yes, Americans are proud of their country, and I count myself among them. And one of the unique characteristics, at least in that degree, of the United States is its constant capacity for reinvention, the churn of American life. The big companies that dominate today, Amazon, Facebook, did not Apple, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, they were scarcely nothing like their current dimensions. So, in principle, that churn should give us hope that there will be change. But I think it's a very disorienting moment. I think people are very disoriented. President Trump is bombarding the American mind and the world, in fact, with his tweets, with his theater, with his manufactured crises. I was thinking the other day, how did we get to the brink of war again with Iran? How did that actually happen? We had an agreement that runs till 2025, and maybe beyond that keeps Iran from a bomb, that involved Germany, France, the United States, of course, Russia, China, and he tears it up. And then he says, we don't seek regime change, we just want to keep Iran from a bomb. Well, hang on a second. That's what the deal did. And you see all these pundits, and they're discussing it earnestly, and the whole thing is a strange fabrication. That doesn't make it less dangerous.
So I think it's very hard, as I tried to suggest, for people to keep their bearings. On the alliance, I think the main alliance that's needed is a strong Europe. That's the alliance that's needed, because right now the United States has gone AWOL. Donald Trump is not. He actively promotes the disaggregation of the European Union. He welcomes Brexit. He hopes that Matteo Salvini might be able to do something similar in Italy. So I think the imperative is for Europe, France and Germany in particular, to come together and strengthen the idea of Europe, what Europe stands for, form stronger European policies, whether toward China or toward Russia. Now it's difficult because Europe is pretty fractured at this moment, but I think that has to be Europe's ambition. And in the United States, I think the alliance that's needed is of people who want to see a change in the White House next year and need to come together around a candidate. We don't know who that will be yet, but personally, I have my own favorites, but personally, once the nomination, somebody wrote to me when I wrote a column about President Trump's unfitness to be present, really, at the D-Day commemoration. To have this bone spur president who evaded the draft and who, bravery, not really a word I associate with him. To have him leading the ceremony seemed, anyway, I wrote a column about it. And this guy wrote to me and he said, for me, next year is going to be my Normandy beach. It's a big one, And I think 5.5 more years of this presidency is hard to contemplate.
Well, I guess we all agree on that. People who come here to this center and to see the exhibition, people of various ages and backgrounds, they often at the end of a tour, they ask us, what does it tell us about Trump, about Brexit, about Europe today? And so this is something that we, of course, think a lot about, and history, as we all know, doesn't repeat itself. But as someone has said, history rhymes, and it seems to rhyme quite a lot at the moment. And one of the big changes is, of course, the social media, the virtual world, this change in, perceiving space and time and connections between people. And one of the interesting things that seems to happen is that the young generation, which grows up into this world, seems to be a little bit more, I don't know, there seems to be a certain hope there, with in Europe, especially Fridays for Future, with all these kids going out on the streets every Friday and telling their parents about flight shame or something like that, and wanting to go on vacation in, next village and not in, Thailand. Or, for example, Hungary. 600,000, especially young people, have left Hungary, but nobody notices it because they're being absorbed by the European Union. But one of the things I've noticed in the US, when I started teaching there, in the Midwest, I was sometimes desperate with the students. You would say Karl Marx, and they would think you're just talking about, a new brand of something, and had no idea. But after the election, this changed dramatically. Not with everyone, but there was a new group of very international, very political students. And I had a course on refugees. Actually, my associate instructor, Morgan, is here. And it was most interesting because they were so engaged and so much into this. You've been traveling a lot around the US since the election. What is going on in the country? So there is the Midwest. There are the people who vote for Trump, even if it hurts them. even if he closes, I don't know, the local airports, and even if they lose their farms over the government shutdown. But what else do you observe?
I mean, first of all, on the museum and links to the present and history rhyming, I think you just have to be careful. I mean, there is in Hungary, in Poland, in the United States, there's a pretty consistent attack on the press, which I described, on a free press, on an independent judiciary, to put it bluntly, on checks and balances, which is what makes our democracies and our free societies resilient, right? And 1933 did not, as the exhibition here shows, I mean, it's not like the Nazi Party, this like egg was laid in 1933 and it was fully formed. No. Bit by bit, by bit, by bit, by bit, it grew, and people got used to it, and their indignation faded, and their acquiescence grew, and then they folded. Right? So when you listen to what emanates from the White House day after day after day, and you can't remember Friday what you were furious about Monday, no way you can remember it. I mean, you just can't. I mean, I can't remember what incensed me 10 days ago. No way, because it's a flood, right? So the human capacity for indignation is limited. It's not. It's not like there's an endless font. Okay, okay, he did that. Okay, lied again. Okay, he insulted this Mexican. Yeah. Okay, he threw some children in a cage. Okay, and I mean, I'm parodying it a bit, but that's where history rhymes. I mean. I'm not suggesting that American democracy is on the verge of collapse. I'm just saying that, Jefferson in 1787 in Philadelphia. I mean, you all know what he said. When he was asked what form of governance had been adopted, and his reply, as you know, was a republic. If you can keep it, a republic, if you can keep it. He was very aware of the fragility of a republic. And I just think we have to be vigilant. Now, what's going on in America? Well, a lot of things are going on in America. It's a big country. And, one of the things you have to understand about the United States, which a lot of Europeans often miss, is that America is about space, infinite space. That is why it's a nation of strivers who want the government off their backs. That's why it's a nation of con men sometimes, because people can move on always. As the country was being formed, there was always a new frontier. There was always another place you could go and fool people. Donald Trump is only the latest in a long, long line of such people. A nation of strivers. Socialism, we all know in Europe that social democracy works just fine. François Mitterrand was, well, we could discuss François Mitterrand, but I mean, he was, an interesting president of France. So, but socialism in the United States is a no-go. I mean, it means communism in the U.S., and it won't fly, and that's why Bernie, in the end, in my view at least, won't fly. So what's going on? Well, what's going on is the economy is booming, right? The economy is booming. The Dow is up. People are looking at their 401ks, their retirement plans, and they're seeing more money in them, quite a lot more money than they did before. And about 1/3 of the country is locked in for Trump. I mean, they believe that he's the most honest president the United States has ever had. While the other half of the country believes he's the most dishonest president the United States has ever had. The people who believe he's the most honest president believe it. Why? Because he tells it like it is. Tells it like it is, and he does what he said he would do. He withdrew from Paris, he trashed the Iran Accord, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, I could go on. So that's why he's on it. For my friends, and I imagine most of the people in this room, the fact that according to the Washington Post, which has this Pinocchio column that keeps track of lies or misleading statements, Trump has at this point uttered or tweeted more than 11,000 false or misleading statements since becoming president. That's an average of more than 7 a day, I think. So clearly, for that other part of America, he's the most dishonest president. So if you take that 33% and then you add in, if the economy, maybe 10, I mean, it doesn't get him over the line, but it's going to be a close-fought election. There are lots of things in the United States going on at state or regional levels that are good. California's going right ahead with all the environmental measures. Colorado, too, that it had adopted. It's not like because of Paris, the United States as a whole has turned its back on environmentally sound policies. There's still, as you know from Bloomington, a strong community sense in many parts of the United States. But the country is fractured. It is fractured. It is being ruled one party at a time, and you cannot get anything done that way. When was the last time you heard an American politician say, well, I only got 70% of what I wanted, but I went for it? And that's life, right? We never get 100%. Do you get 100%? I don't. But that's gone from politics. The idea that you can compromise, that you can accept 70, 75, 80, in the interests of moving forward, whether on education, on healthcare, whatever it is, that's gone. No, everybody's in their ideological canyon. They're watching Fox News or they're watching MSNBC. And, Trump is either the greatest or he's wretched. And that, to some degree, is reflected in European societies because the technology that enables that, and I don't need to go into the details, exists here too. But in America, it's reached a kind of apoplectic degree. And that, I think, is very ominous for the country. I was recently on jury duty in Brooklyn, where I live. I was on jury duty for 2 weeks and in a grand jury. And it occurred to me as I sat there with 22 other jurors, 23 people in a grand jury. These people from, like that room in Brooklyn where I was sworn in. I mean, people from every kind of walk of life. And it occurred to me there are very few settings in American life any longer, and I don't know how true this is in Germany, where you're thrown together, absolutely randomly with your fellow Americans. Obviously military service used to be like that. Or, other forms of volunteering. But now that's kind of gone. And you know what? You of course, as in any such exercise, you begin thinking, holy shit, we're never going to, this is impossible. Because everybody's got a different idea on everything. And, over the course of time, if you're forced to listen to your fellow citizens, you do begin to find areas of agreement. And so that was hopeful, and it was hopeful just seeing, the spectrum of America and all these different people kind of beginning to make their way. And then, on the downside, some of the people that we were coming to verdicts about, they never had a chance. They never had a chance. I mean, they were just, they had no family. They had no real education. They were living in and out of facilities, drugs everywhere. And some of them were kids, 15. I mean, we had a rape victim who was 15. So that's, America can be a very cruel place. Why don't we have some questions from you guys?
Absolutely, that's about the time.
I want to thank you for saying, with the courage you've had, what needs to be said and what I would like to be hearing from the Democratic army of candidates that we have. I'm Hal Lyon. I'm a guest professor here. I've been coming since I was a Fulbrighter some years ago. When I go home, my friends ask me, what do your German friends think about Trump? And I tell this story. I was in a restaurant having lunch, and this German man, came up to me in a nice Harris tweed suit, and he said, I hear you speaking English. Are you an American? I said, yes, I am. He said, do you mind if I ask you a question? I said, certainly not. Go ahead. He said, what do you think of Donald Trump? I said, I'm ashamed he's the president of the United States. He said, I'm buying your lunch. And before, I said, no, but he gave his credit card to the waiter and bought my lunch. What you said today in your talk, which was wonderful, I would like to hear coming out of our Democratic candidates, those that survive. And I was so impressed by your talk that if I can get a copy of it, I will work hard to get it to each of the surviving Democratic candidates. Victor Hugo said, all the forces in the world cannot stop an idea whose time has come. We've got to stop Donald Trump from being an idea whose time has come. And we need what you said today coming out of the mouths of the candidates. We need to have the courage. They need to have the courage and the encouragement to do it. And you, as the popular columnist that I've been reading for years, you can help inspire them that way. But get me a copy of your talk, and I'll get them to them. Thank you very much for your talk.
Yeah, I thought Kamala Harris today, I think it was today or maybe yesterday, when she said that the White House is occupied by a predator, and it's of the nature of predators to be cowards. I thought that was a very, very powerful remark.
Andreas Edkes, I teach American history here. Well, I pretty much agree with you. I was wondering, what do you think about, because you didn't really mention the Republican Party much, and while there is the predator in the White House, and he's hard to stop in foreign policy, there would be many other ways. So I'm in some sense, and Trump might be gone in 4 years, but I'm really worried about the political system and what will become of the Republican Party, or what it has become already. 4 years or a few years ago, it looked like they might implode, but it seems like there's very few people in the newspapers or elsewhere still speaking up against this and really so frustrated by this. But will there be, I think what's also missing is some conservative party with values and morals. Do you see any chance of that coming about again?
Well, the Republican Party has become the Trump Party. He has hijacked the party, and the Republican Party has shown all the spine of a jellyfish in their reaction to the president. Now, I don't know. I mean, we haven't talked much about culture, about the culture wars, which alongside the other wars I described are very strong. And, the Republican Party in many ways has become the anti-abortion party. And whole set of, in terms of identity politics, in terms of gender politics. The Republican Party has, come to embody some kind of ultra-socially conservative, evangelical sort of positions. And, the moderate conservative, fiscally responsible, internationalist Republican Party, of a Brent Scowcroft or that. If your question is that coming back? I don't right now see on what basis, on what foundation it returns, because I'm not sure it has a constituency, a sufficient constituency anyway, in American life, which is troubling. I agree, which is very troubling. But looking around the world, you can't say it's that exceptional. I mean, what has happened to the British Tory party? What has happened to the British Tory party? I mean, a bunch of, aging public school kids, who think, what was that in the European Parliament? Brexit, the British Brexit party turning their backs when Ode to Joy was played? That is disgraceful. That is disgusting. And this is a great political party with a great history. And now it's a bunch of people, obsessed with some Little England notion of, of sort of revived greatness. Britain, Theresa May promised all these great trade deals, when Britain left the European Union. Well, it's concluded 5, I believe, one of which was with the Faroe Islands. So it's not just in the U.S. We're seeing. Sometimes I wonder if people are actually bored. Are people bored? Do they feel there's no existential threat to their lives? So they want to be entertained, right? So they want a Boris Johnson. They want a Donald Trump. They want a Conservative Party or a Farage, or. I'm not sure what explains it, but it's not confined to the Republican Party, I don't think.
Hi, my name is Volker Debkat. I teach American history at the University of Regensburg. Thank you very much for your talk, which was inspiring but also very touching. I want to pick up on something that you mentioned in passing, this idea that he would go on as long as the American people will want him to go. And what I found disturbing about Trump was that already as a candidate, he was discrediting the institutions of America's democracy, saying that he would only accept the election if he should win. He didn't mention the Constitution once in his inaugural address, the idea that the president should protect the Constitution. So what makes you optimistic that he would actually accept being voted out of office? Speaking also of this idea of what we have gotten used to already, right?
Yeah. No, people are laughing, but I think it's a serious point. And, Michael Cohen, in his testimony, Michael Cohen is now in jail, his lawyer, former lawyer, he was asked that question, and he said, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe he won't accept a result that involved his defeat. This president has no respect for institutions or for the Constitution. I don't think he even realizes his oath of office is to the Constitution. It's not to the people. It's not to the folk. It's to the Constitution. It's to the rule of law. And I don't think Donald Trump even knows that, So, I think anything is possible. He sent 7,000 troops before the midterms, and that was the midterms, to the Mexican border to defend the United States against an invasion that actually did become a huge flow of people because, well, for various reasons I won't go into, but basically, again, he he manufactured this crisis. So if he can send 7,000 troops to the border, what is the, extrapolate from that, what is the equivalent in September, October 2020 that he's going to, what's the rabbit? What's the rabbit? There's going to be a rabbit. I mean, that I can assure you. I don't know what the rabbit is. The rabbit could be a few bombs on Iran. It could be anything, really, But he will not go easily.
Another one or two questions.
Yeah. There's a mic coming, madam.
As a journalist, how do you keep yourself informed? What are you reading for newspapers? Who are your colleagues that you really couldn't live without? And I will tell you that the hour-and-a-half wait to get in was well worth it. And do you try to read newspapers and listen to news that's on the other side that you don't really agree with?
Thank you.
You get up every morning looking Fox News, of course.
Well,
Fox and Friends.
Miriam, sometimes I do watch Fox because I think it's an important exercise. You have to understand what other people are listening to. And it's like, it's through the looking glass. It's through the looking glass, The world looks different over there. It's down the rabbit hole.
Down the rabbit hole.
So I find that, yes, I do find that a useful exercise, just as I find it a useful exercise. There's no point sitting in New York with people who think like you, trying to come up with the funniest, latest line on Donald Trump. I mean, the fact is he's a phenomenon. He was in 2016. He is now. I'm a believer in boots on the ground. Journalists, if you don't want to get out there, if you're not curious, if you're not committed to discovering the view from the ground, then try something else. I mean, that's my view. I mean, writing a column is kind of, people think, 800 words, twice a week or even once. What kind of cushy job is that, But you try having one semi-original idea a week. It's not that easy. So there's a balance between, reading the columnists you like, and there are many at my paper or at the FT or the Washington Post that I read. There's a balance between, reading the news and avoiding saturation, because in the end, you have to have an idea. You're in the opinion business. You have to try to think for yourself, and if your mind is saturated, then that's more difficult. So I go through my Twitter feed, which has different. I follow people, of some different views. I mean, like everyone these days, I will worry that what I write is preaching to the choir. How often do people's minds get changed these days? How often do they listen, to something else? And I mean, I will say of Trump, for example, that I think on China, I mean, I'm sympathetic to what he's done, not the way he's done it. I mean, I do think that, Xi's China has become more threatening. A million Uyghurs in camps in Xinjiang province, the end of the alternation of power, this facial identification technology that's everywhere in China now, Belt and Road, Huawei's control of 5G, which, meaning that all our information, because everyone else is behind on 5G in Europe and even more so in the United States. So I think that the time had come. I think Trump is right. I'm pretty hawkish on China, and I think I don't think the way he's gone about. It's been very erratic, and it hasn't. then he decided he had to offer some candy to the market, and he pulled back on Huawei, and so it's all over the place as this president is. But I'm prepared to say that on China, I think it was time to say to China, intellectual property theft, that's over. Technology theft, that's over. You want to play in the international field, you play by the rules, like everybody else does. But, that's the kind of thing that I think people find it quite hard to say these days, to say, that they agree, say, with a liberal or conservative point of view when they're in the opposite camp, but, this or that. And it's very important that the press, I think the press has done a very, has been vigorous, has been strong. I think we need to be careful, not to stray into, to become a kind of parody of ourselves, to be too tendentious. Let's just, on the news pages, just tell it like it is. It's damning enough, you don't need 1,000 adverbs or, just tell it like it is, because it's very damning.
You said something very important throughout your talk, and I just want to repeat it briefly, is that Trump is, of course, an encouragement for many other people, for many other leaders of his type in Europe and much beyond. And he's an encouragement to say things that otherwise one would not have said, and America has become, in many ways, sort of the negative symbol of what it has been before. This liberal democracy that especially Germany, but all Europe and the whole world would look at. And, we're experiencing in Germany a very similar trend. We have the AfD, which openly questions whether, for example, art is allowed to be political, and what museums or educational institutions are allowed to do. And they're in the boards of universities, in the boards of municipalities, in the boards of cultural institutions, and we all have to deal with it and struggle with it, and maybe sometimes try to sort of like bridge the divide and make it possible to, have some sort of a dialogue. But then on the other hand, it's of course quite a challenge. And I keep thinking of this Brooklyn room that you were referring to, filled with people. And I think this is something that you pointed out, these two extreme sides of America, the mass incarceration, the racism. And on the other hand, the America we all love and admire, the America that, has a certain or a real diversity, which I think Europe has never acquired in that sense. Just giving you the example, in Germany we talk of Germans of migration background, or Germans with migration background, or we talk of bio-Germans, sort of like organic Germans, whatever that is.
Bio-Germans?
Yeah, Bio-Deutsche, whatever that means, in order to...
What does that mean?
Separate between the real Germans and the unreal
out
Germans. And I think that for us it really means that we have to think about diversity and strive for that Brooklyn room in a Europe that should awaken and get out there, the many, defer in this kind of demonstration.
I'm sorry to press you on this, but is that a phrase of the AfD, Bio-Deutsche?
No, not necessarily. I don't think so. It's and it's very awkward. If you daily work in a building like that, in a center like that, you find it very odd. But I think I encourage you all to continue the dialogue. I think that's the most important thing, right?
Oh yeah, I'm all for dialogue, and I think civilized disagreement is the sign of any healthy society. And civilized disagreement, it's become maybe rarer. What's going on in universities with people of different views being banned in colleges in the US, and safe spaces, all of that. I think colleges should be dangerous, very dangerous. They should be challenging. They should make you question yourself, question your views. They should push you. So, anyway, the world hasn't gone over a cliff yet. We're still muddling through somehow. I am worried. Well, we'll see what happens between now and November.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Roger. I think you have to return to Munich. I think that was a request of you coming back again. And you all are very warmly invited to come to our next talk of our cooperation with the Amerikahaus and the Bavarian America Academy, which is in October, right? Khalil Muhammad, a professor at Harvard and director of the Center of Racism Studies, will be here. You're all very, very, very welcome. Have a beautiful evening. Thank you.